Picture this, you are running. Not with the joyful abandon of a child, but with the desperate, lung-searing terror of the hunted. The sun beats down on the cracked earth, a merciless hammer striking an anvil of dust. Every shadow is a threat, every gust of wind sounds like the hoofbeats of the men who are chasing you. You have nothing but the threadbare dress on your back and a secret that could cost you your life. Your name is Ilara, and you have been running for 3 days. You see it then, a mirage shimmering in the heat, a solitary cabin, a thread of smoke curling into the vast, indifferent sky. It is either salvation or a trap. With your last ounce of strength, you stumble towards it, collapsing just as the silhouette of a man fills the doorway. He is tall and broad, his face a roadmap of hard years, a jagged scar running from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. He looks down at you, his expression unreadable, a rifle held loosely in one hand. Do you beg for help from a man who looks as dangerous as the wilderness itself? Or do you accept your fate in the dust? This is the choice that hangs in the balance, a single moment where one life is about to irrevocably change another. Silas Blackwood had not spoken more than 100 words to another soul in 5 years. His world was the rustle of wind through pines, the lowing of his cattle, and the creak of old timber in his ranch house. His past was a ghost he had outrun by retreating into a fortress of solitude, its walls built of silence and routine. When he found the woman collapsed at the edge of his property, his first instinct was suspicion, a cold and familiar companion. She was a complication, a crack in the carefully constructed dam of his isolation. He saw the terror in her wide, haunted eyes, the way she flinched when he knelt beside her. He saw the fine, almost invisible, tremor in her hands. He carried her inside, his touch surprisingly gentle for a man whose hands were calloused from rope and iron. He laid her on the cot by the hearth, a place that had been empty for a long, long time. When she awoke, she spoke in a whisper, offering to work for her keep. She could cook, she said. And clean. She would be no trouble. Silas, a man who survived on smoked jerky and stale coffee, merely grunted in assent. He didn't ask for her name, and she didn't offer it. He didn't ask where she came from, and she didn't tell him. An unspoken agreement settled between them, as quiet and profound as the sprawling landscape outside. In the days that followed, a new rhythm took hold at the Whispering Pines Ranch. Ilara, as he would eventually learn she was called, transformed the dusty cabin. The scent of baking bread replaced the stale air. Stew bubbled on the stove, rich and fragrant. She was a phantom of quiet efficiency, moving through the space with a grace that seemed at odds with the fear still lingering in her eyes. It was during one of these quiet evenings, as she kneaded dough on a floured board, that Silas first noticed them. Faint, bluish-black stains on the sides of her fingers, smudges deep in the cuticles that no amount of scrubbing could fully erase. They were the marks of a scribe, or a clerk. Ink stains. They were a tell, a small detail that spoke of a life far from the wilderness she had stumbled into. He watched her, his gaze lingering on her hands. They were delicate, yet strong, hands that knew work, but a different kind of work than this. The stains were a question mark hanging in the silent air between them. Who was this woman? What life had she written, or what life had been written for her, that she had to flee with such desperation? He said nothing. To ask would be to break the fragile truce of their shared silence, to demand a piece of a past she was clearly trying to bury. Ilara felt his eyes on her. She instinctively tried to hide her hands in the folds of her apron. The ink stains were a brand, a permanent reminder of Mayor Thornton. He had admired her beautiful, cursive script, hiring her to be his personal secretary. At first, it was an honor. She recorded town minutes, wrote official correspondence. But soon, the tasks shifted. He would guide her hand, forcing her to copy signatures onto land deeds, to draft contracts that swindled honest men out of their property, his greed a foul stench masked by expensive cologne. The ink was not just ink, it was the physical residue of her unwilling complicity, a stain on her very soul. She had refused, finally, when he demanded she forge a will that would leave a grieving widow destitute. That refusal had turned his cloying admiration into a possessive fury. "You are my asset, my creation," he had hissed, his face a mask of rage. "You will do as you are told." She had fled that night, the memory of his threat echoing in her ears. Here, in this quiet cabin with this silent, scarred man, she felt a flicker of safety for the first time. Silas didn't press, he didn't pry. He simply provided a space for her to breathe. He would leave a bucket of fresh milk on the porch every morning and find a hot meal waiting for him every evening. Their communication was a language of actions, not words. She would mend the tears in his shirts, he would reinforce the loose step on the porch. It was a slow, tentative dance of two wounded people learning to trust the ground beneath their feet again. One afternoon, a storm rolled in, the sky turning a bruised purple. Thunder cracked overhead like a celestial whip, and rain fell in blinding sheets. Ilara, who had been gathering herbs, was caught in the downpour. She ran for the barn, but a sudden flash of lightning spooked a young colt. It reared, eyes wide with panic, and bolted straight for a weakened section of fence. Without thinking, Silas moved. He was a blur of motion, placing himself between the terrified animal and the splintering wood, speaking in a low, calming voice that seemed to defy the storm's fury. He gentled the horse, his scarred hand stroking its trembling neck, his presence a bastion of calm in the chaos. Ilara watched from the barn door, soaked to the bone, her heart hammering in her chest. She wasn't watching a reticent rancher, she was watching a protector, a man of profound and quiet strength. Later, as they sat by the fire, wrapped in dry blankets, the silence between them felt different. It was no longer a void, but a comfortable, shared space. "You were brave," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He looked at her, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. For the first time, she saw past the scar, past the stoicism, and glimpsed the deep well of sorrow he held within him. "I wasn't brave enough once," he said, his voice rough with disuse and old pain. A long time ago. He didn't elaborate, but he didn't have to. In that moment, Ilara understood that his fortress of solitude was not built to keep the world out, but to keep his own ghosts in. She reached out, her fingers hovering for a moment before lightly touching the back of his hand. The ink-stained hand of a forger touched the scarred hand of a widower. It was not a question or a demand, but a simple acknowledgement. "I see your pain. You are not alone." The storm outside raged on, but inside the small cabin, something had finally settled. A fragile seed of hope, planted in the common ground of their shared sorrow, was beginning to take root. Weeks turned into a season. The harsh sun of summer softened into the golden light of autumn. Ilara's fear began to recede, replaced by a quiet confidence. Silas taught her to ride, not with the impatience of a master, but with the steady calm of a guide. She, in turn, brought a sense of order and life to his home, planting a small garden and even convincing him to let her catalogue the dusty books in his study. The ink stains on her fingers faded, but never vanished entirely, a pale ghost of the past. Silas found himself smiling, a foreign and rusty sensation. The silence in his home was no longer heavy with grief but filled with the soft sounds of life, the rustle of pages turning, the hum of a melody as Ilara cooked, the shared quiet of two people comfortable in each other's presence. The ghost of his wife and child, once a constant, suffocating presence, seemed to retreat, their memory now a soft, bittersweet ache rather than a gaping wound. He was healing, and he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that it was because of her. She was the rain after a decade of drought. The illusion of their sanctuary was shattered on a crisp Tuesday morning. A fine carriage, black as a raven's wing, rolled up the long, winding path to the ranch. It was impossibly out of place in this rugged land, a polished intrusion of a world they had both tried to forget. Ilara saw it first from the kitchen window. Her blood ran cold. The emblem on the door was one she knew with sickening familiarity, the golden T of Mayor Thornton. Panic, a cold and greasy serpent, coiled in her stomach. She backed away from the window, her breath catching in her throat. "He's here," she whispered, the words stolen by fear. Silas, who had been mending a bridle on the porch, stood slowly. His face, which had softened over the past months, became a mask of granite. He didn't ask who. He knew. The past had finally caught up to them. Mayor Thornton stepped out of the carriage, flanked by two large, thuggish men wearing bowler hats and cruel smirks. Thornton was impeccably dressed, a diamond pin glittering on his cravat. He surveyed the humble ranch with a look of disdain. "Elara, my dear," he called out, his voice smooth and proprietary. "This little game of hide-and-seek is over. You've caused quite enough trouble." Silas stepped off the porch, placing himself squarely between the carriage and the cabin door. He was no longer the silent, withdrawn man of 5 years. He was the protector Elara had seen in the storm, his stance immovable, his eyes burning with a cold fire. "This is private property," Silas said, his voice a low growl that rumbled in his chest. "State your business and leave," Thornton laughed, a short, ugly sound. "My business is with my ward," he said, producing a rolled document with a flourish. "A legal document of indenture, signed by her own hand. She is my property, rancher, until her debt is paid. And she has stolen from me. Now, step aside." Elara appeared in the doorway behind Silas, her face pale but her eyes defiant. The fear was still there, but now it was mingled with a righteous anger. The months of peace, of being treated as a person rather than an object, had given her back her spine. "That document is a lie," she said, her voice clear and steady. "You forced me to write it, just as you forced me to forge deeds and wills. You are the thief, Mayor Thornton." Thornton's charming facade cracked. His eyes narrowed into slits of cold fury. "Insolent girl. You will learn your place again. Seize her," he commanded his men. The two thugs moved forward, but Silas didn't flinch. He was a mountain, solid and unyielding. "You will not touch her," he stated. It wasn't a threat, it was a fact. The first man lunged, and Silas moved with a speed that was shocking in a man his size. He sidestepped the clumsy punch, grabbed the man's arm, and used his momentum to send him sprawling into the dust. The second man hesitated, looking from his partner on the ground to the formidable rancher who stood before him. In that moment of hesitation, a new sound entered the standoff, the unmistakable click of a rifle being cocked. And then another. Old Man Hemlock, the grizzled prospector from the next ridge over, had emerged from the trees, his long rifle leveled. On the other side of the path, the widow Jensen, a woman as tough and weathered as the land itself, stood with her late husband's shotgun resting in the crook of her arm. They had seen the fancy carriage, smelled the trouble on the wind. They had watched Silas Blackwood slowly return to the world of the living, and they would not stand by and watch him be dragged back into the darkness. "Seems to me the lady made her choice," Hemlock called out, his voice like gravel. "And it ain't you, fancy man." Thornton stared, his face a mottled red of disbelief and rage. His power, so absolute in the corrupt streets of his town, meant nothing here. Here, the only currency was character, the only law, community. He was an outsider, a blight on the landscape. Defeated, he spat on the ground. "This isn't over," he snarled, climbing back into his carriage. As it turned and rumbled away, a cloud of dust was the only evidence it had ever been there. The silence it left behind was profound. Elara stepped out onto the porch, tears streaming down her face, not of fear, but of overwhelming relief and gratitude. Silas turned to her, the tension draining from his shoulders. He looked at Hemlock and Mrs. Jensen, who gave him a curt nod before melting back into the landscape, their duty done. He was not alone. They were not alone. He walked to Elara and gently, with a hand that no longer bore the weight of only his own grief, he wiped a tear from her cheek. His thumb brushed against the faint, lingering stain of ink on her skin. It was not a mark of shame. It was a part of her story, the story that had led her here. The story that had saved them both. The Whispering Pines Ranch was no longer a fortress of solitude. It was a home, built not of timber and nails, but of courage, healing, and the unbreakable bonds of a found family. What is the true nature of a sanctuary? Is it a place, a fortress of wood and stone meant to keep the world at bay? Or is it a person, a connection that gives you the strength to face that world? Silas built a ranch to hide from his past, but it was not until Alara arrived that it truly became a shelter. She ran from a life that had stained her, only to find that those stains were a map leading her to where she was truly meant to be. They saved each other not by erasing their pasts, but by choosing to build a future together, right alongside the scars and stains that made them who they were. We all carry marks from our journey. Scars from battles lost, and stains from choices we regret. But what if those marks aren't meant to be hidden? What if they are the very things that allow us to connect with others, to show them they are not alone in their own struggles? How many times have we judged a book by its cover, a person by their scars, without ever reading the story within? Let us know in the comments below what you believe it truly means to give someone a second chance. And if their story moved you, please like this video and subscribe for more tales of courage, hope, and the incredible resilience of the human heart.